I was told in one of my very first interactions where I showed up 15 minutes early to get the meeting set up, and the time of the meeting, start time in our calendar invite came and went. And 15 minutes later, the first person showed up. And then half an hour in, the next person showed up. And I thought, okay, we've got enough people to get started, but the elder hadn't shown up. And there was a community event that took place that required a lot of the people that were in my meeting to tend to, and that's always going to take precedent. And so here we were. Once the elder arrived, then we could begin, right? And my agenda items in the 2-hour span that I had for our meeting, they got discussed in the last 10 minutes because the first hour and 50 minutes were sitting in community together, opening with a prayer and a song and a smudge, and have a cup of tea and talk and build community, build relationships, right? And the 10 minutes at the very end were the highest quality decision-making 10 minutes that I think I've ever had in a meeting. And it set the path forward for us to go deeper that much quicker the next time. In fact, the fact that I was even invited to come back the next time was because you show up authentically to build the relationship and you relinquish the control. And the elder said to me, the meeting will take as long as the meeting needs to take.
I remember the first time I met Tania. It was 2012 in Montreal, and we were at a conference called ERDI, which brings together senior leaders, superintendents, directors, and the corporate world in this sort of somewhat, I guess, weird but interesting few days of learning. And she had just left York Region School Division to go work with Pearson, and I had just left to go work with Discovery Education. And so we were two people trying to figure our way, public educators trying to figure our path in the corporate world. And so I followed Tania for a number of years before that and continued to, and then she went back to public education, serving in Kuwaitan as well, then finishing her career in York. So I've known Tania for a long time and was just curious to hear. And we've had a number of conversations leading up to today, talking about Indigenous, her passion for Indigenous communities and cultures, and trying to create better learning opportunities for students. And it was just important for me to have that conversation with her. So if you are curious about how to approach the challenges that exist with Indigenous teaching and learning, this episode is for you, as well as we talk about the dichotomy or duality, if you will, between being a public educator and working in the corporate world. Fascinating, for me anyway, is. And so this is just a really rich conversation about those two topics specifically and leadership in general. So enjoy my conversation today with Tania Sterling. I just finished asking you about what retirement looks like, and you haven't been doing it that long, but you're finding your ways and you're understanding that there's still a lot for you to not just to learn, but also to contribute in those spaces. And one of the things that I know, particularly in the latter part of your career, that you were involved with is just Indigenous community, Indigenous learning. And I know you're very passionate about that and are very committed to continuing that area. So maybe just give us kind of high level of what that time was like, what you did in that space and what you learned. And I know you worked in different communities, and so you've got an interesting perspective to share. So I'd just love to hear kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much, Dean. And yes, I feel really grateful to have had a range of different experiences that have given me closer proximity to learning about and working alongside Indigenous communities. And I think it all started back when I was doing my master's, and I attended a conference, and it was around the time when Stephen Harper had launched the Big Apology. And then, of course, we know what came after was Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. And around that exact same time, I was actually on a secondment working for Pearson Education. And the historical current events that was pushing me to learn more. And quite frankly, it was hard to find information about what had happened, which, as we know, is part of the challenge. But, I had the opportunity to situate some of the work that I was doing in school boards where there were high numbers of students that self identified. And so having the chance to go into community and experience the beauty, the richness, the opportunities, the challenges, to see firsthand the diverse communities that make up the tapestry that is, let's say, within my context in Ontario, in communities where we have students on reserve coming into public education systems after elementary school, for instance, and just working and learning alongside families was really eye-opening. And the chance to then join a school board after my time at Pearson in the role of superintendent serving those communities was extremely eye-opening. I used the expression, I went up to Keewatin and Patricia as a person and I came back transformed because of the immersive, eye-opening experiences and what I was gifted as teachings from so many wonderful elders and communities. And it really has become a passion for me ever since then to take whatever opportunity I can to learn more, to listen, and to share, and in a position of influence to be able to advocate and lift up the voices of Indigenous communities. So, again, it's been an ongoing journey, and I continue to be very interested in it, even though I did retire in October of last year.
You and I were of a similar vintage. And one of the things that's very embarrassing, I think, for our generation is that we didn't know anything. We didn't learn any of this stuff in school. Like nobody told us. And so we were coming upon this as, first of all, as adults, but thinking about, we've had the privilege of at least being in an education context where we've had more opportunity and more need to learn more. But
Mhm.
our contemporaries who aren't in education really, as ignorant as you might expect them to be. And I think about that learning piece. And again, I've had some really powerful moments in my own career in this area. And one of my new learnings, I think, is just understanding that the Indigenous culture, while we have this blanket of First Nations, Indigenous as a big thing, they're all unique. And
Oh,
I know in British Columbia, I think there's 99 different languages. And I noticed too that in that province in particular, and also in the north, the notion of them being connected to the land, obviously, and being such an integral part of their culture, elevated even more to a greater degree than maybe even here in Saskatchewan. But I wondered about even your two experiences in Keewatin, because that, I think there's something there too, right? Northwestern Ontario. So can you just talk a little bit about, and again, maybe I'm not framing this question well, but just maybe what the difference of an Indigenous community in the GTA area versus Northwestern Ontario, and just maybe some of again, I don't know if it's differences or just awareness of you have to understand that geography, right? And really
oh,
to understand the people.
for sure. And so I have recently been gifted the expression of really trying to understand peoples of place. So, this
Mm.
concept of, even when we reference Northwestern Ontario, we're probably talking about two or three different treaty areas that come up against one another. And so to paint a picture of homogeneity of First Nations cultures for Northwestern Ontario is incorrect, right?
Mhm.
Because they are all so unique. In Keewatin and Patricia, the geography of the country of France sits inside that school district. So although they have just over 5,000 students in their public elementary and secondary schools, they are spread across a vast geography. And each community is very unique, and each First Nation community then has its own peoples of place dynamic. So when we get into the GTA context, there are some communities that are remote And we also have the richness of the urban Indigenous communities, right? So, in the context of my former school board, York Region, we had urban Indigenous context. So, that's the context that we have students of varying First Nations, Métis, Inuit identities coming to schools without the benefit of that community connection because they have moved and there is no one, with the exception of Georgina Island First Nation to the very north of the board. There is no reserve that they have local and nearby. In Northwestern Ontario, another difference is they have OFIFC buildings. So Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centers. These are buildings that gather community in a place to celebrate cultural happenings and events. In York Region, despite its vast size, there is no friendship center. So there is Georgina Island First Nations to the very north, which if you're in the south part of the board down by the 401 highway, you're talking about an hour, depending on traffic, could be 2 hours to get up to Georgina Island, which is actually on an island. So you take a ferry to get across. So the urban Indigenous population has richness and opportunity and the additional challenge, if you will, of not having a
Yeah.
central gathering place where in remote communities like in Northwestern Ontario, you would have that looking a little bit different because they are living in community with one another.
Yeah, and I mean, again, the disadvantage when you're in urban. I mean, I know these stories from even our time here in Moose Jaw and
Mhm.
Regina, where kids didn't know their connection to the land was no different than anybody else's, and yet their culture is founded on that, and so how they
Right.
can connect back to their community is much more difficult. Again, it can be done. There's always all kinds of rituals and traditions that aren't necessarily land based, but so much of it is.
Mm.
Yeah, I think
The
that's
concept of ceremony, I have come to learn that ceremony is central to their identity. And without the access to ceremony and practicing traditional ceremony or events like traditional week where you go in on the trap line and you're hunting, and without that, it's like part of your, again, it's a barrier based on
yeah.
where you are now situated, right?
So, I mean, I know when you left York, we talked about it a while back that you felt like you had done some good work, but obviously there's so much more to be done. So, I guess
Mm.
maybe just to wrap this part of the conversation up, what do you feel that we have done well and have progressed in our kind of collective efforts? And then where do we still have to go here?
Mhm. One of the things that I really tried hard to practice is the concept of developing collaborative relationships and to approach relationships with Indigenous community members from a place of humility and with that learning stance, right?
Mhm.
When I was in my role centrally in leadership development as a superintendent, and we were looking at parent and family engagement, I heard from a lot of schools up in the north part of the board that they had little to zero representation either on school councils or at school council meetings of their First Nations families, even though their population in their school community was very representative of First Nations students. And you kind of scratch your head and you say, what is it about school councils? What is a more meaningful way to gather with the First Nations families? Where do they gather? And I didn't have those answers. So in my building of a relationship with our Indigenous trustee, I had a conversation and asked that very question. If we're trying to forge new relationships with Indigenous families, what would you recommend we do? Because coming to school councils and all the things that, we want to promote that parent family engagement, but in an authentic way, it doesn't seem to be working. And she explained to me that actually she herself, when she was raising her daughters, found that she went and tried to be part of school council meetings, but that things didn't have any relevance. The topics didn't have relevance for what she was experiencing on reserve when she would go to the island. And so it didn't seem worth her while. And what she recommended was, if we really wanted to try and make a connection with families, to go where families already gather, and that's at a powwow. So we had done this before. It had been a few years with the COVID stoppage and everything. So what we did was we worked with the administration at the high school that is right in the Sutton community where Georgina Island is close to. And the school field of the high school became the powwow grounds. And we began the planning process. This was 3 years ago. And we had started up again that collaboration where York Region was the site and was very happy to be collaborating to provide a space for Georgina Island First Nation to host its annual powwow. So 3 years later, participation doubled, tripled in numbers, the types of expanded vendors that were coming forward, student involvement. It just became more and more. And it's just about sitting down, listening, maybe putting aside structures they're working for certain identities. And in order to be more inclusive, we might need different structures. So adopting a stance of, let's host you and we take your lead on what you'd like to have happen. We were very happy to do it. And this last powwow was, I'd say, one of the best ones yet that I have been to. Really happy to have had that experience.
So what, I mean, and again, I think that points to, I think, a commitment to, like you've outlined it, like being curious, and like, we're trying to understand. So how do we do this to set up a structure and a context that's comfortable for everybody to learn? And I say comfortable for everybody. I think it's okay for us as white folks to feel a little uncomfortable sometimes. That's not a bad thing. But so moving forward, like, where is it just a matter of continuing down this path, which I'm sure obviously there's more of that to do, but are there other things that we should be mindful of in creating moving forward?
Yeah, I think that we have a ways to go in terms of hiring Indigenous staff of First Nations, Métis, Inuit. Ideally, we'd have teachers in our schools, and we do have some teachers in our schools. We need more. We need more representation there. I know the board is trying to recruit and retain language speakers, for instance. The whole province is really struggling to have Ojibwe language offered in our school boards. And we know the importance of language. And in the province of Ontario, if you prefer to take Ojibwe as your second official language as part of your graduation requirement, you can do that. And we have more interest coming from students to want to have their second language to be Ojibwe. So now it's on us to try and promote, recruit, and retain to support more Ojibwe language speaking teachers. That's a challenge. If somebody has the solution for that, I know a lot of families and students could benefit.
Yeah, those are tough ones. But I think the whole recruitment thing, I was in Alberta a couple of weeks ago, and one of their strategies, because they've got a number of First Nations communities there, and this isn't just specifically with First Nations, but it includes First Nations, is just with teachers in generally, to identify kids in high school to say, you know what, you would make an excellent teacher, and we want to call that out now. And if you're willing, we will actually, as a board, help pay for your post-secondary. You come back and teach for us. And so there's these kind of innovative ideas that are happening throughout the country. And in particular with the Indigenous communities, they were very reluctant to have to send those kids off to Edmonton. This was in rural Alberta. So they didn't like that idea of the kids going. So they figured out a way to, again, create virtual opportunities so those children could learn and stay in their local community. So I appreciate the fact that there are more and more people across Canada and different provinces and jurisdictions working at it. So again, I'm optimistic. Obviously, I know that we haven't gotten all the way there. We've come a very long way. I just think about my first times as a teacher and then as a school leader, really seeing such huge gaps that were there, and really, just scrambling with ideas that were often appropriation, cultural appropriation and everything else, like under the best that we knew and tried. And I was like, that's not a very good idea. But I feel like we're getting closer. So I appreciate all the work that you've done and continue to do. Let me shift gears. I want to talk a little bit about, so that's a really important part of your your educational identity and experiences, the Indigenous thing. But another big part of it, and I'm curious about this personally because you and I both have a similar trajectory as well, is that you took a secondment from your time in York, or I don't know if you were in York
Yep.
region at the
Yep.
time, and went to work for Pearson. And Pearson at the time was the big bad company, right? Like they were, there was, yeah, and again, there's always been a bit of a education has had an public education has had an interesting relationship with the corporate world. They
Yeah.
certainly they can't live with them, they can't live without them.
Mhm.
And those of us like you and me that came from public education, I don't know about you, but I was very wary of my early days when I was with Discovery is like how I would be perceived. Am I selling out? And they're trying to make money. That's what and they weren't hiding that. Yeah, we are. We still want to do good work, but we are making
We're-
money. So just tell me a little bit about your time with Pearson and again, what lessons you learned and what that experience was like and how that maybe helped you when you went back into public education.
Yeah. So all of that you were feeling, absolutely. The way it all came about was quite interesting. In the early 2000s, like you, we were those innovators dabbling in technology. And I would go to the Echo conference every year and you walk the vendor's floor. And over time, you start to build relationships with different companies because what they're doing seems interesting. And I was very much in that how to leverage technology to augment student experiences and learning, right? So I, over the years, let them know that I was pursuing my doctorate. And when I finished my doctorate, I was at one of the conferences and I was approached by them to say, so I hear you're finished now. And I'm like, wow, you remembered? It's just so funny that somebody would be keeping track of that type of thing. And so, anyways, long story short, I did have the opportunity to have a secondment from my board to work for Pearson in the capacity as a research and communications manager. So, having just completed my doctorate and I did a reading test mode comparability study, I kind of globbed onto the word research, thinking that I'd be doing research, right? So, research and communications, I learned afterwards, is business speak for marketing, right? So, I was very much thinking one thing and landed in a different portfolio. And I didn't know how I would even do it that because I don't think of myself as a business person. And yet, what I began to realize was sales is storytelling and relationship building and understanding a need and having a solution that can help with that, right? So I would go out on calls and I would listen to school districts talk about issues, challenges they were having. And yes, there was a product that was sitting in the wings that could be part of the solution, but sometimes there wasn't. And what myself and the sales rep would learn from those conversations was hugely insightful in terms of what Pearson needed to do next in terms of product development. And that's actually the spot that I just really leaned into. And I was grateful to be around those development tables with journey mapping and agile development and taking sprints and making sure that the design of the product would have its intended outcome. But then I was in that capacity asking the question, how will we know? And maybe we should study that implementation, right? To see, are we improving student outcomes like we said we would? Or are we making the changes to educator practice or leadership practice like we think we would? So out of all of that came the efficacy agenda with Pearson globally. Okay. So Sir Michael Barber, huge researcher and change person based out of the UK, right? Put together this framework to assess the likelihood that whatever innovation you're putting forward will have a greater chance of achieving its intended outcome. And that's what my role evolved into. And I had some really interesting conversations with people internally at Pearson who helped me to understand how public education is still very much a business. When you look at municipal taxes and money that is needed to fund it and fuel it. And I learned so much through my experience in corporate education that I when I came back, I was a much more well-rounded, knowledgeable individual to then return to into my role as a superintendent afterwards. But along the way, we just my role left from the product development side and became a little bit more of a business consultant. And it was my last contract with Keywait and Patricia that sort of set the next course in my journey because I was handing over the efficacy review report on that board's strategic plan. And I was encouraged to apply for the superintendent position.
That
So
that worked
the
out
rest
well
is
then. So
history.
you sold the thing and then you got to implement the thing that you
Yeah,
sold.
exactly. Right.
Which is, I mean, again, that's putting your money where your mouth is. If you say this is such a good thing, then let's see how this actually plays out. Because again, that's one of the in the corporate world, we can't promise anything beyond what the people are capable of implementing. We're trying to provide the supports and the frameworks and all of those things, but in the end, it's teachers in a classroom and leaders that are helping those teachers that are going to determine the success of whatever. Because there's no magic that's out there.
It's
It's
that
like
capacity to deliver, right? It's
right.
100% that capacity building that's needed, right? So absolutely.
Well, yeah, and I think too, the other thing I've learned so much, and I think what I've gleaned from both of these two conversations we've had is that your skill of listening, like you really want to listen to what other people have to say and try to process that and allow people to say, here's what's working, here's what's not.
Mhm.
Jumping in right away to say, oh, I've got it all figured out. Let's just kind of lay this thing out on the table. And again, appreciate the complexities of what it means in education. And that's, I think, too, where sometimes the corporate side of things wants to present itself as here's the solution. I always hated that word. And I railed against it internally to say, we don't do solutions. There's no solution to this problem. Like, that's not what this is about.
Mhm.
But also thinking about, for me, the telltale sign that I was in the right place doing the right thing
Mhm.
was the fact that I worked with so many people who were genuinely authentic. Because for me, that was the big thing that I wanted to maintain was a level of authenticity. Would I be the same person and not, like you said, sometimes when you listen, we don't have a solution. We don't have something to offer for you. Like our product, our services aren't a good fit. And you get to say that in a very honest way rather than trying to shoehorn it in because you're trying to make a sale.
Mhm.
And I felt like I worked with people who were of that caliber, and I never had to check my morals or my values at the door,
Well,
that it was very value driven. And I think in the end, any organization, company, whatever, that has long-standing success has to have that, right? Sure, anybody can come in and make a quick buck and then you're out of there and but if you're going to be in it for a long term, you have to have that. I don't know, again, when you worked with other people that taught you things in terms of they maybe weren't educators, but they were still
mhm.
people that you respected. That must have been a big part of your experience as well.
Oh, for sure. And I think that just as we think about moving forward, how do we authentically collaborate and elevate community voice in the work that we're doing when we're looking at developing resources? What are the images that are included? Are we representing the diverse beauty and fabric of communities across Canada? Because there is no one look and feel, right? Like we've just
Mm.
talked about. Every corner of every community, provincially, in the territories, in the far Arctic, it's this is something that the average Canadian does not have proximity to see firsthand.
Right.
And some people might think, I don't have Indigenous students. I don't need to teach Indigenous education. I would argue that's more of a reason to be teaching about Indigenous histories, right? And so, how do we do that in a way that is respectful, culturally responsive, right? The answer is we should not be making those resources. Those resources should be made by Indigenous communities, their voices, right? Because for us to deem what is right or wrong or valued, unvalued. That's us layering on, that's perpetuating decisions being
That's right.
made for them. And that whole adage of nothing about us without us. They need to be leading, right? And we
Amen.
need to be taking the lead from them. So
That's
I think that for corporate opportunities moving forward, for that partnership and those authentic engagement opportunities, that's really the challenge that lies ahead. And I think it's really exciting.
Mhm.
You used the word optimism earlier. I'm very optimistic because there are amazing communities doing fantastic collaborative work right now. And so, how do we shine a light on that, try and scale that up in different communities? It's really
And I
fun.
guess the thing yeah, and I guess the thing that is the most challenging for corporate entities when they're working with public education, but anything really that you understand is gonna be highly collaborative and highly sensitive and all that stuff, is that just takes longer.
Hmm.
You don't do it quickly, which is something that I would say arguing that is not a capitalistic mindset, and so you have to push that that side of things to say, "Listen, we'll do this, but this isn't gonna happen in one meeting and boom, we're done and we're going." Because if you are actually trying to get their voices and make it about them, and again, that's the Indigenous conversation is one thing, but I think that's true in so many other elements as well,
100%.
is that it just you have to be patient. And sometimes education gets a bad rap for being, "Oh, they're so slow, they move so slowly, they don't move like business." Yeah, we're not a business. Our job isn't to create widgets. And so we that is just one, I think one ethos that we have to continue to embrace
Hmm.
and call out, saying, "We're doing a thing. The thing we're doing is gonna take a while because we wanna make sure that everybody's voice is heard." And that is not about efficiency. Like, that and you and I both are taking some deep dives in AI, which often is about efficiency, which, yeah, there's a time and place where efficiency is a good thing. We should embrace it when it's appropriate, but it's not always about it.
No.
And when it comes to these kinds of communities and race relationships, efficiency just that's not the word we would use it. But there's that's where being able to tell people just slow down, make sure we got this right. It might take
Yeah.
longer,
Yeah.
but it'll be better.
And Dean, the concept of pace and speed and all that, again, I was told in one of my very first interactions where I showed up 15 minutes early to get the meeting set up and the time of the meeting, start time in our calendar invite came and went. And 15 minutes later, the first person showed up. And then half an hour in, the next person showed up. And I thought, okay, we've got enough people to get started, but the elder hadn't shown up. And there was a community event that took place that required a lot of the people that were in my meeting to tend to. And that's always going to trump that. I won't use that word. That's always going to take precedent. And so here we were. Once the elder arrived, then we could begin, right? And item, my agenda items in the 2 hour span that I had for our meeting, they got discussed in the last 10 minutes because the first hour and 50 minutes were sitting in community together, opening with a prayer and a song and a smudge and have a cup of tea and talk and build community, build relationships, right? And the 10 minutes at the very end were the highest quality decision making 10 minutes that I think I've ever had in a meeting. And it set the path forward for us to go deeper that much quicker the next time. In fact, the fact that I was even invited to come back the next time was because you show up authentically to build the relationship and you relinquish the control. And the elder said to me, the meeting will take as long as the meeting needs to take. There you
Yeah,
go.
which again, in the corporate world, those things are like just get people very uncomfortable. So, you know what?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
we're gonna have to that's how this has gotta be, and so let's just embrace that.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about specifically about leadership. You just shared a little story there, which I love, that kind
Mm,
of illustrates a learning from your perspective
mhm,
around agendas and
mm.
traditional things that we as leaders do. But I wonder if you have another challenge that you thought of over your career that was like, oh, that was a tough one. That was a tough one. I think about that one a lot in terms of, and it could be something that you felt like you overcame, maybe you
Mhm.
didn't, but just something that just sticks in your mind as being like, that was really a leadership challenge that I will always kind of hold dearly for lessons learned.
Yeah, as school districts have a lot of policies and procedures, right? And when I was in my leadership development role, I was given the portfolio of updating the policy on parent, family, and community engagement. And historically, we get very little responses from public consultation for policies. And when I take something on, I really want to put my best foot forward and try hard. And I thought of all the policies where we need to make sure we get good community engagement, it should be the policy on parent and family community engagement. I was given a deadline schedule of when it needs to track to get to board and then to the second reading and then trustees and all that. And I was looking at the process that was being proposed, which was the same old, basically let people know about it by posting it on the website and hope that people come by and give some feedback. The average family is really busy. They're not going to spend time looking online for policies that are just on a board website. So I put forward a request to senior team to do things differently. And again, exactly what you're saying. It took twice the amount of time. And again, knowing what we know about building trust, and especially around parents and family community engagement, I was not the person that would be necessarily the right person to be leading the consultations around this policy in spaces where I don't have those identities or those relationships. So a challenge that we had was, how do I broker a relationship with community affinity groups so that authentically they're giving the feedback that's required, just maybe not to me? Like, how could I broker that? So in the board, there are community partnership developers, and I worked really closely with the principal of inclusive schools and community services. And I leveraged the relationships with the affinity groups and these community partnership developers to have them host feedback gathering sessions. And we received an outstanding amount of feedback that we then did a qualitative coding exercise to look for trends and recommended changes. And I hold that policy consultation as one of the things I'm most proud of in my career, because it took longer, it took a lot more human resources, and I think we got it right, because we did what we said we were going to do in a way that was a lot more inclusive of voices that had not had their opinions represented in the past.
Oh, that's a great, yeah.
Yeah.
That's, again, there's lots to take from that example.
Mhm.
So one more question, and then we'll finish with some quick ones here. But I always like this one too. And just in the spirit of gratitude, like when you think of one and again, I know people don't, it's more than one person, but just give me one today that you think of. That's a person that I'm really grateful for in all my time in education. So maybe in your early days, maybe in your latter years of service, just name one person that you're grateful for.
Yeah, so I think of my grade 13 French teacher. I know that's going way back, but you know what? When
Even to say grade 13, which is
I
kind of
know,
like,
now you're able to date
people are saying,
stamp
what's
me.
grade 13?
Exactly. Exactly. But you know what? That tumultuous time when you're trying to think about post-secondary pathways and where you're going to go and what you're going to take. And I don't know, I had it in my mind that whatever I was going to apply to and pursue at university needed to be like super hard. I don't know why. And my French teacher, I just adored, and I excelled in languages, took different languages through high school even. And he basically said, why don't you take French? And I'm like, I never even thought I could take just French. And so anyways, Terry Ruff is his name. And he was my grade 13 teacher in Burlington at M.M. Robinson High School. And I basically followed exactly what Terry did. He went to Western University and spent his third year abroad living in Nice, France, as part of a exchange program. And I did the exact same thing, and just am so glad that guidance came exactly at a time and place when I needed it. And my parents were our first generation Canadians, and hadn't pursued post-secondary here. So there weren't a lot of people in my family to lean in and guide me in that way. And he did. And I'm really grateful.
I think it speaks to, and there's so many people when I ask that question, reference something like that, where you have this sort of singular phrase or something that somebody has said to you that's changed the course of your life, career, whatever. And I think it speaks to things that we say all the time around, you never know what thing you might say might, good, bad, or otherwise,
Yeah.
the impact that those words have. And I mean, he maybe has no idea that his
Oh, he does.
encouragement. Oh, he does. Okay. That's great. That's
Yeah, I
great. But
told him
there
I
are
may.
certain, yeah. But how often might there be a teacher who said something to some kid that did really do it? So these aren't just little
Mm,
mythical stories that exist. This happens every day in schools. And it's just a good reminder for teachers.
absolutely.
Hey, what you say matters and can really sort of project someone's life. All right. So where are you? Are you, I don't know. Are you in Brampton? Where are
I'm
you
in
located?
Woodbridge. Woodbridge.
Woodbridge.
Yeah.
Oh, Woodbridge. Woodbridge. That it just reeks Italians.
Oh,
That's all
yeah.
I think about when I think of, oh, this would be great. All right. It could be Woodbridge, but it could be other things. So these are but anyway, so first of all, let me ask this question. I don't know if you've taken a break from you haven't taken a break, but professional learning, reading, but is there something you're reading or listening to today that is really capturing your imagination?
Yeah. So, you know what? Exactly like you said, after 30 plus years of reading trade books on the nightside table, I have really enjoyed returning to pleasure reading, and two books that I highly recommend. It's by the same author. The first one's
Okay.
called The Frozen River, and it was just so compelling as a story that I bought another one of her books, and it's her book called, I wrote it down. It is the Sorry, Dean, just one sec.
Mm.
Where is it? Here. Code name Hélène. So adventure-y and kind of different for me as a genre, but I'm hooked. So
Okay.
those are my two.
This is just always an encouragement to me to read more fiction. I'm bad at this. I
Exactly.
need
I
to do
know.
this more. So I'm presuming, listen, your evenings aren't tied up with meetings anymore. So you may have a little more. So what do you do you have a binge that you like to watch, a series that you're watching? What do you got on that front?
Yes. We are just enamored with the series called Drops of God on
I'm not
Apple
familiar with
TV.
this one.
Oh, wow. You have to watch it.
Okay.
And the other one is, of course, North of North, with the new series
Yeah.
about the woman living in Ice Cove. So those are
Yes.
two pleasure series that
Okay.
I'm really
This is
enjoying.
very selfish on my part, both these questions, because it's okay. I write that down
Add
because
it to your
there's
list.
probably, we just finished one the other day that was a recommendation from the podcast. So
There you go.
that's good. And so here's the last question that's really Woodbridge related. Again, it doesn't have to be Woodbridge, but tell us like a hidden gem or something in the area that come out to Woodbridge and experience what?
Okay, so if you come out to Woodbridge, you must experience the California sandwiches to have veal on a bun. Okay, it's a little shop that makes the most delicious veal on a bun with the homemade tomato sauce making in the back there with the nonnas and everybody. They're absolutely delicious, and you have to get the little side container of olives because they spice them just beautifully. So that's the first thing for food. If you're looking for adventure, there is a little secret that is a hidden gem of a walking trail, and it
Hmm.
actually forms the carrying path trail that was really significant for Indigenous people, actually, because it connected along the Humber River. It's the trail that goes beside the Humber River in our neck of the woods here.
Hmm.
It's right behind the McMichael Gallery, which is just north of us. And it was the portage route to connect Lake Ontario through the Humber River up to Lake Simcoe, and then it became the passageway to the northern Great Lakes, which, if you think of northwestern Ontario and where we had a lot of Indigenous
Right.
communities settle and form different First Nations, it's a place of great significance. But it's beautiful. It's just full of wildlife and nature, and it's right in our backyard. Beautiful.
That's fantastic. I definitely will do both those things with spending my next number of weeks in in Ontario lots of times. So maybe you and I will grab that sandwich or something at some point
There you
as
go. That would
well.
be
So
fun.
well, thanks so much, Tanya. This has been great getting to know you, and I'm excited that we'll get to spend a little more time together learning with and from each other. I always learn so much from you, and this was just great to kind of get a little bit more of a deep dive in some of your experiences. And so thanks so much for your time.
Oh, I enjoyed it. And thanks so much, Dean.